Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Play, Pause, Rewind, our 64th episode. We are back after releasing a different video last week. So, yeah, but we'll talk about that in a second. Niles, how have you been since we last recorded?
I've been good. Happy to have a day off for 4th of July. It's always nice to have, but not enjoying the weather in Colorado, but whatever,
Pretty
I've
hot.
been having a good time otherwise. Seeing people and hanging out, and yeah, it's been having a good time. How about you, Dylan? How are you?
Oh, pretty good. Not feeling the most patriotic this 4th of July, because of,
Fair.
a thing called the Supreme Court, which we don't like very much here anymore.
Yep.
But yeah, this week, other than that, whatever, I'm doing fine. Saw a movie. Things are fine. But we, in the spirit of what we're about to talk about, last week, on Friday, we released a rewind on our second channel, Play, Pause, Rewind videos, on Raiders of the Lost Ark, the first Indiana Jones movie, to get us in the spirit for the fifth and, I'm assuming, final Indiana Jones
It better
movie.
be.
Yeah, it should be. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, the fifth installment in the franchise. And it follows our titular hero, Indiana Jones, as he enters retirement. But he is pulled along on one last adventure with his goddaughter, Helena Shaw, as they are racing against the Nazis again, to find Archimedes' dial, or the Antikythera, the Dial of Destiny. We'll just call it the Dial.
Just the
But
dial, yeah.
yeah, but of course stars Harrison Ford, Phoebe Waller-Bridge, Mads Mikkelsen, Toby Jones, John Rhys-Davies, Antonio Banderas, Ethan Isidore, and more people than that too. So
Plenty, yeah.
yeah, and in a pretty monumental change for this franchise, it is no longer directed by Steven Spielberg, but is instead directed by James Mangold, who you may know from Logan, 3:10 to Yuma, Ford versus Ferrari, and Walk the Line, I think, and many other films. He's a good director. Written by Jez Butterworth, John Henry Butterworth, and David Cope. Niles, what are your initial non-spoilery thoughts on Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny?
God, Nazis again. Hey, I just can't get away from them. He's keep coming back. But yeah, I think overall I'm positive on this movie. I wasn't expecting much, especially after Crystal Skull. That definitely set the bar very low. You've seen it more recently than I have, but because you rewatched all the films and prep for our rewind video. But yeah, I haven't seen it in like 10 years at this point. So
since it came out, probably, right?
Yeah. I only saw it in theaters. So I mean,
you want to feel old? That was 15 years ago.
All right. Well, thanks for that. I love that. Especially, turn it. I mean, yeah, I think the Crystal Skull, for what it is, it's not like, it's probably better than I remember it being, but at the time I didn't enjoy it a lot. And I think, I was thinking anything's better than that. And I think this movie definitely does that. It's better than Crystal Skull, but it is tough to meet the like standard that's set by Holy Grail and Raiders of the Lost Ark. Like those two are just like amazing. And I think just like are the golden standard for this series. But this one I feel like had a lot of similar tones to it, and it felt in a lot of ways like reminiscent of classic Indiana Jones. Like it felt quippy, it felt clever to me, and it felt fast paced. But obviously it's not a perfect movie, and I don't think this one like holds a candle to Raiders. I think it has some parts that are great, and then some parts where I just rolled my eyes, or it just didn't fit very well. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I'm slightly positive on this. I liked it and enjoyed watching it a lot, but I don't think I loved it. And sort of my takes on all the movies are Raiders and Last Crusade. I love. They're some of my favorite movies ever. Temple of Doom, I love the atmosphere and the set design and a lot of like sequences in it, but I've never really loved that movie overall. And Crystal Skull I did not like, and I still don't like, except the beginning of that movie is very good. I would say up through a motorcycle chase through the college where Indy works, the movie is great. It's only in the like back half of it where it starts to get kind of dull and sometimes just bad.
Yeah.
But it's and I enjoyed this movie more than I enjoy Crystal Skull. I don't think I enjoy it more
Hmm.
than I do the first three, in even Temple of Doom, which I like less. But I don't think Dial of Destiny manages to provide any moments that match the highs of any of the previous four films, especially in the action set piece category. There's
Yeah.
one really fun chase scene through Tangier, I believe, but
Hmm.
I don't think that matches, what we've come to expect from an Indiana Jones action sequence. But that being said, I think the narrative works solidly well. Harrison Ford is very good, and it gives us a nice final adventure with Indiana Jones, I think. So
Yeah.
I a lot of people really love it, and a lot of people are liking it, and a lot of people really hate it too. But it's
Mm,
yeah, I do want
interesting.
to talk about one sort of bummer about it though, is that it's bombing hard financially.
Oh,
Like,
really?
mm-hmm. And part of
Fun.
the problem is the budget reportedly is around $300 million, which is too
Ooh.
much.
Yeah.
Because I think the movie made like 60 or 70 million over the weekend or something. Not good.
Yeah.
And young people are not seeing it. The like over half of the people who bought tickets apparently are 40 plus. So
Yeah.
that is I guess a something I'm learning about the Indiana Jones franchise is I guess it's not really a thing a lot of young people care about anymore, which is kind of a bummer.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, it's like, I think when those movies were coming out, if you were growing up at that time, like those
Hmm.
movies were just groundbreaking. They're like kind of on the same level as like Star Wars, of just like
Right.
how like infamous they were and foundational, I think, for a lot of people's lives were at the time.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think the unfortunate thing for the franchise is that I feel like it's so closely associated with I mean, it's a pro and a con. It's so closely associated with Harrison Ford. Like he is the brand in a lot of
Hmm.
ways. He's the face of it. And he's getting older.
Yeah.
He's not in as many movies now. Like
Hmm.
he's not. To me, it's not surprising that a lot of people aren't seeing it, but it is. Yeah, to your point, like yeah, just it's a different kind of era of cinema when people were growing up and seeing this, and so I think it's the nostalgia that's bringing them in and seeing these kinds of characters
Hmm.
one more time on screen, which I think they're the best part of the movie are the characters. Like I think they really shine here too.
Yeah. And I guess too, it is a thing where this franchise hasn't been present for a lot of younger people, I guess. And
Yeah.
we've talked about this before, how like I don't want franchises I love to be ever present or whatever, but for a lot of people, that's the only way they remember they exist is if they're coming out all the time. And that's a bummer about today's day and age. But I didn't even think about it like when we were kids. I always thought about Indiana Jones as like something that came out when my parents were younger or stuff like that for whatever reason. But Last Crusade came out 5 years before I was born. Like it wasn't
Hmm.
that long before our time, I suppose. So
Yeah, that's true.
yeah. But enough about that. I will say that I think Spielberg's absence can be felt in this movie a little bit. James Mangold is a great director. I like his films a lot, but there is a touch that Spielberg has that Mangold just doesn't. And I think it was pointed out on Twitter. I saw it was like there's blocking in business in scenes, right? Like blocking is where your characters are in relation to each other in the frame,
Hmm.
and business is what they're doing in the frame. And Spielberg was great at having his characters have business. And the example used in this tweet, and I agree with, is in the diner scene in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull when Mutt and Indy are having lunch and like getting to know each other a little bit. There's just an unspoken interaction where the waitress is serving another table. Mutt steals a beer off the tray and then puts it down on the table. And then without a word, Indy puts it back. And it's just,
Mm,
you have that you have Indy like parenting him without even realizing he's his son. And there's not as much of that type of stuff in this movie. And I think it's just something
yeah.
that Spielberg is such a master of filmmaking that he's great at that. And yeah.
No, that's a good point. I mean, yeah, I think it doesn't feel like those old Indiana Jones films, and it's hard to get that kind of feeling. But yeah, I think what you're getting at is like weaving those little moments in there that really kind of give it this character, like this movie kind
Yeah.
of rounded out, and it doesn't feel so um generic,
Well, yeah,
like
it
I think
makes
there's
exposition scenes have character. It's like
yes, yeah.
instead of just conveying plot to us, show us details about the character. Like, what are they doing while they're explaining the importance of this artifact or something like that? That's when we
Hmm.
learn how these people act. And Spielberg was really great at that.
Yeah,
Um,
that's true. Well, yeah, it's a shame to hear that there's such a disparity or like a wide range of opinions
mhm.
for this film, because yeah, I think yeah, you and I we're in a similar boat. You obviously are not as thrilled with it as I think I am. I don't think it's amazing, but I think it's still solid through and through.
Yeah.
And you know, I think that kind of just speaks to it that after coming off of like Crystal Skull, and you're trying to please multiple audiences
Mhm.
here simultaneously of like, well, we need to draw in the new audience, and we need to appeal to like the nostalgic fan base. So it's kind of like, how do you please everyone?
Yeah, I don't think
Unfortunately.
this movie is trying to draw in new audiences at all, honestly.
Well,
I
just to make money.
well
That's
to
just
make
what I meant.
yeah,
Yeah.
you would think, but like from a story point of view or a character point of view, like I don't think there's anything here that would like entice a new audience member who doesn't love Indiana Jones to see it, and maybe that is part of the problem from a business sense. But I don't think trying to appeal to that new audience is necessarily the right move. Like, I hope that this movie existing causes young people who haven't seen them to go back and watch the old Indiana Jones movies
Yeah.
because they're great. And that it like I've never met someone who doesn't love them, who's seen them. And I will say there is the decently fun Tangier chase, which I talked about earlier,
Hmm.
and there's a really big creative swing in this movie that I respect a lot, but I don't know if it totally lands the way they want it to, and I can't elaborate without spoilers, so we'll save that for later. But it is riskier than I thought it would be going into this. I thought it was going to
Yeah.
be kind of a Rise of Skywalker situation where they're trying to do the greatest hits, or even The Force Awakens to a lesser extent, even though The Force Awakens is good and Rise of Skywalker is bad. But I respect the movie for taking bigger swings than I thought it was going to. And I don't want to come across as negative on the film because I do like it. I enjoyed watching it. I don't even know what I wanted from this that it didn't deliver. Um, but I think, and I said it with Crystal Skull, and I say it all the time. If you end a movie in your franchise with your characters riding off into the literal sunset, that's the end. You have to stop.
Hmm.
Pirates of the Caribbean and Indiana Jones are two great examples of that. Because this is now the third movie that is sort of our farewell to Indiana Jones, and I don't think Crystal Skull or this managed to top the end of Last Crusade.
Oh yeah. I mean, I haven't seen that movie in forever, but it's hard to top the originals and just like what really made this franchise so great.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like I think that is kind of the problem with this series too, is like I I don't think you or I asked for it. We didn't really want it. It was like we got multiple endings for this character already,
Mm-hmm.
and like depending on whether or not you like Crystal Skull or not, you could just be like, well, I'm gonna ignore that movie and just focus on Holy Grail. That was the ending for Indiana Jones, so I
Last
don't
Crusade.
need another. Yeah, yeah, Last Crusade. Thank you. I'm just synonymous with Monty Python in my head.
Oh,
It's
what?
the
Okay.
title, because they're searching for the Grail. So I'm just
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
Indiana Jones and the Holy Grail. Like, no, it's Last Crusade. But I think it's a good one overall,
yeah.
and
Mm-hmm.
I think that there are some moments too where like the effects look all right, and there's sometimes where they don't too,
Yeah.
which is kind of a bit of a problem in my
Mm-hmm.
opinion for this film. Like,
Yes.
not getting too far ahead, but like there's like an underwater scene that I don't think looks
Mm-hmm.
too great. There's also some times where they're flying, or like Harrison Ford's de-aged, where it's like
Yeah, that's in the
this is
trailer, so like
yeah,
it's coming. It's not a spoiler.
yeah,
The
right, exactly.
de-aging, we'll talk about it more in a minute in spoilers, but it varies pretty wildly in quality. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, I would say like final non-spoilery thoughts for me. It feels like a nice farewell to a character, the character of Indy, a farewell that we didn't necessarily need because we've gotten it a couple times. But the movie
Yeah.
is uh pretty fun, but not as memorable as I would like it to be, I would say. What about you?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. You know, it's I think the story stands on its own. It feels akin to the classic films, but different in its own way, and
Mm-hmm.
it's hard to top Raiders or Last Crusade. So
Yeah. All right, let's do some spoilers. And we'll start with the opening of the movie because the movie opens with an extended flashback sequence set during World War II, and Harrison Ford is playing a de-aged, or is de-aged to play an age-appropriate Indy for that era. And
Mhm.
right off the bat, I noticed I'd be really interested to compare the runtime of this sequence to the opening sequences of the other Indiana Jones films because like all of them have a little opening that is kind of loosely or not even connected to the rest of the plot, right?
Yeah.
And this one, especially compared to the Last Crusade, I those are the two I want to look at because they're very similar in a lot of ways. I felt like this flashback went on maybe a little bit too long because it was taking time away from things that could have used more development in the present day story. I think and the de-aging itself varied wildly in quality, as I mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
sometimes within the same shot. Did you think the sequence
Yeah.
overall worked, or the de-aging felt good enough for you?
Yes and no.
Mhm.
Because there's moments where I think it looks great, and like when it's not a close-up shot, you know, when it's kind of
Mhm.
more he's far off,
Yeah.
those look fine. You know, I don't have a problem with those shots, but like yeah,
Mhm.
when there are moments where, like you're saying, within just a few seconds, it just kind of depends on the lighting of the scene and probably like the lighting of the archival footage that they have, because it's my understanding that they have this archival
Mhm.
footage of him when he was younger, and then they kind of
Right.
look for those frames and then they try and splice that in as best as they can so they don't have to
Mhm.
do a whole bunch of like weird stuff. But I think that they still have to make some effects. But
Yeah.
you know, I think that it's not consistent throughout. Like there are
Yeah.
moments where you can tell that it's not great, you
And
know.
there are moments where it's like really, really good too, which is the
Yes, yes.
frustrating part. And aside from the like quality of it, I am kind of getting to a point where I'm ready for us to just cast younger dudes again to play younger versions of these characters. I think the de-aging is and was fun in like 20-second increments in the Marvel movies, but it's getting to a point where I think it's being overused. And like it used to just be that you would have another guy like River Phoenix play a young version of the character in The Last Crusade. And speaking of that, this sequence really does feel to me like it's James Mangold's take on The Last Crusade. It had a classic era indie for one. It had a chase scene along the
Hmm.
length of a train, and it has a Nazi castle, like in Last Crusade.
Yeah.
And I like the sequence. It's fun, and it's nice to see the indie we grew up with again for a little mini adventure. But I think the amount of parallels it has to Last Crusade don't do it any favors because the Last Crusade is a masterpiece. And but like the more important thing is I think there are things that are undercooked in the present day that this sequence is taking time away from. And
Yeah.
that's the biggest downfall for it because otherwise it's very fun. You know, you get to see what
Yeah.
Indy was doing in the war. You get to see him in his classic costume. He's getting an artifact from Nazis. And yeah, but I'm overall a little bit mixed on it, even though I like it in a vacuum, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I liked it. It did feel like classic era indie. Like this was enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is kind of like a moment that has some fan service in there of
Mm-hmm.
okay, let's just do something that's entirely like synonymous with Last Crusade, something that's very similar to it. So I think
Yep.
it a lot of those older fans I would imagine would like this. And I did enjoy this sequence. And I think overall there's a lot of good action sequences throughout this movie too, like the tuk tuk chase sequence in um uh
Tangier.
Tangier, thank
Is
you.
that what
Yes.
the little vehicle is called? A tuk-tuk?
Yeah, I think so. If I remember right. And then like there's a chase sequence through like the parade of
Hmm.
the Apollo crew coming back, and it's like they're the heroes, and
Yeah, that
Indy's
was a pretty
running
good
through on
set
horseback.
piece, I guess.
I liked it. Yeah, I
The
thought that was
horse
kind of
on the
cool.
subway was really fun. Now he has to time like he just a second to get across the tracks. Yeah. So that's
Yeah.
probably the most memorable set piece, I guess, for me is the horse one.
Yeah. I thought that was neat, and like just the idea of like just an old crotchety archaeology professor riding a
Mhm.
horse through the subway is like, that's funny. I
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, and
Um,
they do kind of the movie leans into the fact that he is old in a lot of ways, but they do kind of stretch like what he can do physically, and I think you have to with a movie like this. It wouldn't be very
mhm.
enjoyable if he couldn't do anything. So he's a very agile 75-year-old man.
Yeah, Indiana Jones and the Last Staircase. Just
But I think his age more comes into play thematically than it does physically. He is
I agree.
although I will say in other movies, like when he gets shot or injured, I'm like, he can deal with this. In this one, when he gets shot, like once, it's like, oh no, he's gonna die from this.
Yeah,
So,
I thought
uh,
that too. Yeah.
yeah. But let's talk about Indy as the protagonist once again, and just give some thoughts on his arc and stuff like that. Harrison Ford, as always, is great. He very clearly loves this
Hmm.
character and has been a great custodian of him for decades now. And yeah, but we find Indy in a very different place. He's kind of sad and alone and living in a small apartment in the city. And yeah, it was kind of rough to see him like this at first. I thought it just kind of made me bummed out.
I know. Yeah, it's a very different performance, and I think Harrison Ford did a good job with it through and
Hmm.
through. Like this feels like a very different, nuanced interpretation of the character, because yeah, he's had this big shift in his age and throughout his career. He's had a lot of adventures and done a lot of
Hmm.
things, we can assume, and obviously he's seen a lot of crazy stuff, and he's got this big shift from this intrepid, rugged, charming adventurer to this grumpy, exhausted, retired old man, and
Hmm.
it is quite this shift. And one scene that I really liked in this movie, I think it's probably one of my favorite scenes, just because I've just been thinking about it a lot, was his final classroom lecture, because it stands in such sharp contrast with his first on-screen lecture in Raiders.
Yes.
Back
Hmm.
then it's every girl in the classroom is swooning over him, and everyone's paying attention, and
Right.
he's passionate about it. And then in this final lecture, he's still passionate about it, but no one did the reading, no one's paying close
Hmm.
attention. It's kind of a dark room, like everyone's totally checked out. It's a new generation of students,
Yeah.
and no one's paying attention to this discussion that he's having. And I really liked that, because it really did show this shift, that the generations and the world has kind of moved on from
Hmm.
it, like Indiana Jones, like as a character, and like the kind of the concept of archaeology, or finding these things out, like the cultural discourse has changed, and
Yeah.
the students roll into the classroom with this the TV monitor, and it's like, here's they're talking about the parade, and he
Right.
like kind of just resigns, or in like a resigned manner just shuts off the projector, and it's just like you're shutting off the old world, and everyone's looking forward to the next
Exactly.
frontier of space,
Right.
and it was interesting.
Yeah, because archaeology as a field is about looking to the past and the cultures of the past and what can we learn from that. And this scene, I think, does a really great job of signaling that shift in culture from like, we're not looking back anymore. We're looking forward. We've gone to the moon. We're taking steps into the next phase of humanity, I suppose.
Hmm.
And that dovetails nicely into Indy's arc and just the idea that the world has left him behind. And I think the elements you just listed do a really great job of laying the foundation of this character arc for Indy, in that he feels alone in the present day and is sort of longing for days of yore where he felt that he had a defined place and people that cared about him and valued him. And I and sort of we didn't mention it earlier, but like Marion and him are divorced at the start of this
Hmm.
movie. His son Mutt got killed in Vietnam. Uh and part of that, the cynical part in my brain is like, oh, they wanted to distance themselves from Crystal Skull as much as possible,
Right. Yeah.
which um is not a storytelling decision I usually respect. I like when you embrace the things of the chapter that came before and try to build on them in ways that make them better. But I do think the loss of Mutt and the collapse of his and Marion's relationship is fertile ground for character storytelling. But I do think Marion should have been in the story a little bit at the beginning to help establish that falling out.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about that more a little bit later in cameos and stuff. But I think where the movie really falls short for Indy is that once he's on the adventure, I don't feel this struggle being built upon with him. And I felt like he was kind of just along for the ride a little bit. And then
Yeah.
at the end of the movie, when they're in ancient Rome, or they're not in Rome, but they're in Roman times, and he's like, I want to stay in the past. I want to be here. Like, there's nothing for me there or whatever. I get what they were going for because they set it up, but the movie has done so little with that for so long that it felt like it came out of the blue. And
I
then,
agree.
and then the other element that bothered me about it is that this is resolved by Helena punching him and bringing him back against his will. Where what I would have preferred from a character point of view is she shows him, no, there is a life for you in the present. You just have to like see it or something. And then she convinces him, and then he makes the decision to come back and try to make his life work with Marion instead of being involuntarily like kidnapped.
Yeah. Right. It just kind of, because we talked about this before. I can't remember exactly what it was, but we talked about it kind of this symbolic agency here of like,
Mm-hmm.
if it was the Last of Us kind of decision where the decision was pulled out from underneath the
Yeah,
character
yeah.
and they couldn't actually make that decision for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And like it just feels like kind of hollow in a
Right.
way of like you lose the emotional triumph here for Indy of like, if he decided, okay, then I'm going to turn back around and come back to the present and decided that on
Mm-hmm.
his own, it would have, I think, been more satisfying for the audience
Yeah.
as a resolution.
And because the movie had done so little with this like longing for the past and like isolation in the present for such a long period of running time, it felt to me when he was trying to stay in the past that he was like delirious because of blood loss, not that he was making an emotional decision
Yeah.
regarding his state in the world at that point. And it was probably meant to be both. But I think what I should have taken away from the scene was he feels empty, and now he feels like he gets to live among these things that he's cherished and researched his whole life. But what I was thinking is like, what the fuck is wrong with him? Like, you're gonna die, dude. You have to go back.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just little tweaks would have made that moment very powerful, and I don't think it hit the mark perfectly.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it was. I mean, it was an interesting way to end the movie, and we'll talk about that, I think, in a little bit too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I think the character arc that they had was solid. Just the ending, like the way they tried to stick the landing, it was clumsy
Yeah.
for him,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
I think I had a note of this later, but I'll just say like lots of ideas that work very well in theory here, and some of them don't quite work in execution for me, but they could have, you know. And
Mhm.
maybe on rewatch I won't be bothered by this stuff as much. But and again, I want to reiterate, I like the movie.
Yes,
I
yeah, we
feel
both
more,
do.
I
Yeah,
sound more negative on it than I probably am, but like I liked the movie, but it's not great in my opinion. Um but moving on, I think to the side characters, Helena and Teddy, our
yeah,
newest additions here. Helena Shaw is the daughter of Toby Jones's character from the prologue, played by Phoebe Waller-Bridge. She's Indy's goddaughter, and Teddy is her short round, basically.
yeah,
They they even met in the same way that Indy and Short Round met, which I thought was cute. It's like she is almost a new sort of little bit murkier morally Indiana Jones character because she's starting out in the same way.
yeah. No, I like Helena. Like, I've seen some comments online just saying that like she's kind of irritating, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that's just more the manosphere.
Yeah.
complaining that.
Yeah.
Because I think that she has
Indiana
some.
Jones went woke, Niles. They put a
Yeah.
woman in it.
God, I should have listened to the news this morning. um, because I think that she does have these moments where you're supposed to be irritated by her
Mhm.
character and frustrated with her, but I think like she's a great addition to the story, and she does serve as this opposite to Indy
Yeah.
because when she comes across artifacts, she's selling them on the black
Mhm.
market, and what whenever he finds them, he preserves them. So it's like it's a different um perspective on the like world of archaeology, so it makes for a good dynamic between the two of
Mhm.
them, and it's just even more interesting. That's like, oh well, you're your goddaughter, and your dad was all about preserving artifacts and stuff too, so it's like
Yeah.
kind of adds some layers to her character. But I really liked her. She felt very heavily influenced by Marion as a
Interesting.
character to me, just because Marion was like, more independent and strong, and that's what
Okay.
Helena feels like to me.
I feel like she's kind of influenced by, and we mentioned in our rewind episode that Temple of Doom is a prequel. She kind of reminds me of Indy in the early sections of Temple of Doom because
Mm.
one of the things he says when they go looking for this treasure early on in Temple of Doom, it's like fortune and glory. And he is still Indy in that movie, but the movie opens with him like selling an artifact to a gangster guy, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And seeking fortune and glory. So maybe they kind of combined those two elements and made designed Helena after that. But I really liked her and I liked their relationship. And I think she had a similar dynamic to Indy at points that Mac did in Crystal Skull, which was his like British
Oh yeah, that
friend who
guy.
like kept double crossing him. And I think Helena succeeds where Mac failed as a character. um, because I like Mac is baffling as an inclusion. I do not understand Mac. But Helena, I think, really works, and you can understand like the logic of where she's coming from and why she double crosses him when she does, and why she sticks by his side when she does. And she has a nice arc too. And it's like you can tell like deep down she really is more like Indy than she's letting on or wants to admit. Um,
Yeah.
and
No, I,
yeah, great addition. And it's nice to have a younger character around to do some action stuff because Harrison Ford is 80 years old. He can't do that anymore. Like it's
yeah,
nuts.
right. No, and I liked that in the film too, that like they have that moment of dialogue where they're both like climbing a wall and Indy's
Mhm.
taking forever and she's like, "Why are you taking so long?" And it's like, "Oh, it's because I'm old and also I've been shot a million times
Yeah,
and
it's like
I've been
9 times, once by your dad.
I I have like 90 concussions and my bones have
Mhm.
been broken a million times, so
Right.
excuse me." And she's just all spry and stuff. So I like that. And
Mhm.
but I think that they have a good dynamic, and I did enjoy that. The reveal of her, you know, she played this kind of innocent
Mhm.
character around him, and she just kind of schemed him out of this artifact, which I thought
Yes.
was really
And then
clever.
leaves him.
Yeah, like I was like, this is cool. Like this
Mhm.
this is kind of a cool premise to throw in there.
Yep.
And I liked the dynamic between her and Teddy too. Yeah, like he's like you said, it's basically short round, and
Mhm.
he has a lot of those similar kind of motifs, to that character.
Yes. And let's see what else we got. So we got the villain Mads Mikkelsen. I think based on real life Nazi turned NASA scientist Werner von Braun. Um and yeah, he's this character is a former, not well, no, not former. Once a Nazi, always a Nazi. I
It's a
feel like
Nazi,
you
yeah.
don't get to walk away from that shit. Um,
Once a Nazi, always a Nazi.
yeah,
Yeah.
but he's a Nazi. He just like helped them get to the moon or whatever, and he wants to get the dial of destiny twist to kill Hitler and take over. Which that's a fun detail, actually. That's
I
a
like
fun
that.
little twist. Um, but yeah, he's not my favorite Indiana Jones villain. I don't think he's all that memorable, but he functions just fine as the antagonist, evil Nazi. And I did think
Yeah.
another element similar to Last Crusade on the train chase, he gets knocked. There's like both movies have a swinging thing off the train
Yeah.
track that comes into play in a significant way. In Last Crusade, Indy jumps on it to try to escape and it doesn't work. And in this, it hits Mads Mikkelsen in the face and knocks him off
Oh
the
man.
train. But
God,
he
he pulled
survived.
yeah, he pulled a lot from that movie, but yeah, somehow he survived getting hit that going however fast it was. But
Hmm.
yeah, I think Mickelson, yeah, he does good job in antagonistic type roles like
Yeah,
these. I feel like he's kind of typecast in that way,
a
unfortunately.
little
But
bit.
if you're good at what you do, why change it? So yeah, I think he did pretty good, and
Hmm.
I think his villain reminded me of just because we just watched Raiders, kind of reminded me of Belloc, the main villain
Okay.
from that one, because Belloc had this, knack for swooping in and kind of taking Indy's plunder right after he solved the puzzle and got it. And
Mm,
Mickelson's character kind of did the same thing several times in this movie too. So that
yeah.
kind of I liked that poetry there.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's just sometimes yeah the I know it's just an action adventure film. This character at the same time kind of feels cartoonish and silly, as a lot of these Indiana Jones villains do. Of like, why didn't he just fucking kill Indy in the cave? Like, why did he have to take him alive? He shot him already. Just kill him. Like, it's
Indy
easy.
is
Just do it
taken alive in every movie. Every single
every
one, he is
time.
taken alive. That is a trope of Indiana Jones. They like he gets captured by the bad guys and they all like have to collaborate through puzzles. That's how Indiana Jones works.
Yeah. But it was like
um
we already have the puzzle figured out, so why do we need him? And I don't know. It was weird, but he's a Nazi at the end of the day, so I'm not going to read too much into it.
yeah. I do love the like just a little detail where Helen is like about to kick a guy out of a plane. She's like, "Sorry, but you're a Nazi," and kills him.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of her to do
yeah.
that.
It
And then
is. It's making the
we
world a
also
better place through
yeah, one
Nazi
Nazi kick at a
elimination.
time. Yeah.
Mhm. Yes, but we do have some returning cameos. Sala, played by John Reese Davies, once again. And I did like it's a little fan servicey, but I did like when he drops Indiana Jones off at the airport and it's like he's kind of waxing poetic about the days of old. He's like, I miss the
Yeah.
desert, I miss the sea. He's like, let's go do another adventure. Um, and it just really like that was the most real, natural moment of the film for me was just them, the two of them, and then Indy's like, those days are gone. Like we're too old.
Yeah.
Like it just I liked that little interaction. I don't like the give them hell Indiana Jones that comes right after that, but I liked that bit of the scene quite a lot. And
Yeah.
those two characters. I also like the touch that he had immigrated to America with his family, and it was Indy who is the guy who made that possible. I thought that was very sweet.
Yeah, I did like it. I like seeing him show up, because he showed up in the third one, right, as
Yeah,
well. Like
yeah,
he kind of showed up
he's
there
in
too.
Raiders and Last Crusade.
Yeah, so it's nice to have that kind of recurring character show up that isn't just like he's an old friend and then he gets gunned down and two scenes later it's like, oh shoot, he was my old friend. Oh well.
Like Antonio Banderas.
Yeah, who just it's a nice, yeah, great.
One weird thing about Antonio Banderas' character, the way, and maybe this is just my brain being ruined by franchise drivel for the last 15
Yeah,
years, but the way Indy talked about going to find him made me think it was supposed to be a character that we'd met in a previous movie for
me
whatever
too.
reason. And then it was just, and then it like I couldn't recognize Antonio Banderas right off the bat. So I'm like, oh, it's just a guy, which is fine. That's
Yeah,
totally fine. In Raiders of the Lost Ark, Sala is just a guy he knew from
yeah,
before. Marion is just a girl he knew from before. I don't know why my brain couldn't deal with that in the moment, but it really threw me off. And I think that's on
yeah.
me. I don't think that's the movie's fault. That's me.
No, it was just interesting, like getting like this big name actor for this role, and then it's like, oh, you're just killed off pretty quickly. But it's yeah,
It was
no big deal.
that part was strange.
It
That's the
was.
movie. The not the
Yeah, that's the weird part of the movie. But yeah, I like Salah. He's a fun character. His inclusion to me felt like it was kind of calculated a little bit in a movie
okay.
studio, like, because I think casting him as an Egyptian in this day and age, I think some people might view that as problematic. So they were like, he shouldn't have too much of a role. Let's just give him a few scenes for some
Oh,
nostalgia
okay.
to
I
bring
see what
people
you're
in,
saying.
because like it's like it's not a bad thing I think to have him because I don't think anyone has an issue with him, but
No.
at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, we don't want to go back to being a culturally insensitive movie.
Maybe it was that. Yeah, I feel like just because he is the guy who's played Sala the whole time, I don't think people would have had an issue with that specific
Oh
case. But
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I think he's in the movie just the right amount. Like this story is not about him and his, you know, one could argue his inclusion even in Last Crusade is fan service, but I think he works great in that movie. But I think it's like having two old dudes go on an adventure is maybe a little bit less what they wanted than just Indy going on an
yeah,
adventure with the next generation of people, right? But I did
yeah.
like Sala. I liked those
Hey, he's
moments with
cool.
him. We also get the return of Karen Allen as Marion Ravenwood at the very end of the movie. And nice to see her. But like I said earlier, I think we maybe should have I don't know. Maybe I'm being too nitpicky, but I think we should have seen the some element of their relationship early on to show that maybe Indy was running away from his problems in the present, and that was his like need of the movie is that he needs to learn to confront the loss he's dealing with and work with Marion to get through it together. Instead, like we get divorce papers in a shot, and then she cameos at the very end, which
Yeah.
I think if she was in the beginning, it would have felt like a nice bookend, but her just cameoing at the end didn't work for me as well as I would have liked it to.
Yeah. No, I get that. I think it's a fine inclusion to have her come back in
Mhm.
this movie. I agree that I think she should have been at the start too. Didn't need her to be there all the way throughout, but yeah,
No.
they're at the start, there at the end. That would have been nice. I definitely rolled my eyes really hard. This was one of those moments that I kind of hated was the dialogue that they had
Mhm.
between each other. It was like a callback to their conversation on the boat
Yeah.
from Raiders of the Lost Ark, where they're coming back and he's like hurting all over, and he's like, "Oh, where does it not hurt?" And she's
Mhm.
kissing him where it doesn't hurt, and they do the same thing here. And I think it worked well back then, and it was cute, and it worked
Uh-huh.
for the movie. I don't think it works very well here, and I
I
just
agree.
kind of cringed about it. I'm like, there's got to be some other dialogue you could use, like something
Mhm.
else. Like it doesn't even need to be a callback. Like you could do something new too. Like,
Just the question, and I was listening to the Weekly Planet podcast this morning, and they talk about how her line at the end asking him like, "Are you back?" They
mhm.
took from that it wasn't Marion who was inconsolable, it was Indy, and he's the one who was having issues and ran away, and that this is her asking, it's like, "Are you ready to get back to our lives now?" That's it. That's all you need for dialogue in that scene.
Yeah.
Are you back? I'm back. And I think that works better because I agree that exchange works perfectly in Raiders in that scene. And because it's like that's their big romantic scene in that movie.
Mhm.
It's like they're the first time they're like actually being affectionate and romantic to each other in the course of the film. It works really well. I didn't love it here either. But I like that he ends up with Marion. I think that's the
Yeah.
appropriate end for the character's journey. And I was glad that she was in the movie because when I heard she wasn't in it, I was kind of like, oh, that's weird. It's kind of odd that they're cutting her out, but they didn't. So
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting, but yeah, I think a lot of people were expecting like a short round cameo in this movie too, and
mhm.
especially with um I'm not even gonna try and pronounce his full name, but Quan, the actor, he has had so much success lately with everything
Mhm.
everywhere all at once. So I think it would have been nice to see them back on screen together because now I feel like a lot more people recognize him and know who he is. It's like, oh, that would have been
Yeah.
cool, but
They were
whatever.
apparently filming at the same time, those 2 movies,
Ah,
so his resurgence has happened since then, and I'm kinda glad they didn't put him in it, like, considering that because it probably would have been just, like, a extraneous cameo done in reshoots rather than something that added to the course of the movie, and, but I will say, like, if they feel like continuing this IP in the future, which I'm sure they do, they love well, actually, maybe not. This didn't do very well financially, so maybe they had plans for that, and it, died. But,
oh well.
teaming up Helena and Short Round in something isn't the worst idea. I don't feel like, if you want to
Yeah,
continue
that could
doing
be fun.
adventure archaeology movies in some way, but I was fine not seeing him, even though it is weird that he's in Temple of Doom and then is never mentioned in any Indiana Jones property ever again.
Yeah,
But
just one of those characters.
let's talk about the Dial of Destiny itself, though, the title item, I suppose. How do you
Yes.
feel about it and its inclusion and how it works and all that?
I like it because I think, it's definitely better than the Crystal Skull.
Hmm.
In my opinion, I feel like Indiana Jones, when you think back on the last few films, he's always going after these big, notable historical items that have this actual kind of real world inspiration. And there's things like this in the world, or at least it has this mythos. Like everyone
Yeah.
knows the Ark of the Covenant, everyone knows about the Holy Grail, everyone knows about, or at least has heard about something like the Antikythera, which is a thing, like a real world kind of thing from like a discovery of just like it's really like an old like device that
Oh, okay.
helps them actually like look at like track the positioning of stars and planets. So they couldn't predict time fissures as far as we know, but I thought for like an artifact, I thought it
Hmm.
made sense and it worked well here.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yes, I think so. And for me, the like core thing that made me not love the Crystal Skull as an artifact when I was a kid was that I felt like Indiana Jones looks for these like very religious, spiritual artifacts, right? You have the
Hmm.
stones, the like sacred stones in Temple of Doom, and then you have the Ark of the Covenant where the Ten Commandments are held, and the Holy Grail that like caught the blood of Christ. Like that's and I never liked the Crystal Skull or the aliens as a result of that. Of like, I didn't, which is maybe silly, but I thought that that was a core element of it that didn't translate to that movie. And it really doesn't translate to this either. But for whatever
Hmm.
reason, I'm more okay with this than I was the Crystal Skull because I, I don't know, aliens, I know, interdimensional beings or whatever. George, don't at me. But I do love the interview clip of Steven Spielberg where he's like, it's like, George, I don't want to do aliens. And George comes back and he's like, all right, you're right. We're not going to do aliens. They're going to be extra dimensional beings. He's like, great. Thank you. What are they going to look like? He's like, oh, they're going to look like aliens.
It's like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
back to square
But,
one.
but this being like like an artifact of antiquity worked close enough to the like religious artifacts for me. And I appreciate that the mechanics of it are a closed loop time travel thing rather than just a key to the gateways of time, right? It's a nice, neat little twist where it's like everything that they go back to do has already happened and it will happen again. It's just the mechanics of this little thing. And I also like that it's not a time machine, it's a compass. It
Hmm.
it like guides you to the place where this rift in time is happening and it brings you to the time period that this specific rift goes to. I
Yeah.
thought that was really neat. And the scenes hunting for it I thought were really fun too. I thought it built up a decent amount of mystery around it. And
Yeah.
yeah, so it's solid.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah, I
talk.
think it works well as a good MacGuffin. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a solid MacGuffin, and that leads us nicely into talking about the climax and the end of the movie. The big
Yes.
creative swing that we mentioned earlier, because time travel happens, which
Yes.
I
Wouldn't
uh,
expect it in an Indiana
no,
Jones film, you know?
no, and some people were saying it's like this doesn't like why are you calling this such a big creative like or big like swing? Have you seen Indiana Jones? I'm like, yes, there has always been magic and weird shit in Indiana Jones, but it's more um it always felt less concrete to me, like we
Hmm.
see basically the wrath of God or whatever in the arc melt all the Nazis, but it's never really explained. It's like something that's beyond the comprehension of the characters in the story. The Grail and Sacred Stones, like the mechanics of them are simpler, but same thing, right? So time travel is a big leap, I think. But yeah, what did you think about it?
Well, I thought I like idea of time travel being kind of included, because it is kind of that, it feels like an evolutionary step, and at the same time it feels very similar to those things that you were talking about, like,
Hmm.
you know, the these historical items, they have this kind of mysticism about them that is unexplainable. You can't explain what happens, why it happens this way, and
Yeah.
all this other stuff. It just is. It's beyond human comprehension, and just like you said, and I think
Hmm.
this works well with it because it is that compass, like you're saying. It guides you to this thing that we can't explain, these
Yeah.
time fissures where you can go through time, and it feeds into that closed loop idea.
Hmm.
So I like that, the idea of time travel being included here, and I think it works pretty well,
Hmm.
and the it ties everything nicely up with a bow, which I do
Yeah.
have some mixed feelings on. And I feel like I always do with time travel. I'm always like, oh, it's too nice and it's too succinct.
Uh-huh.
Um, and I have some, I don't know how I feel about the screen time with of Archimedes. Actually, we actually get to see the inventor doing these things, and I think the more I've thought about it, the more I feel that it him being included in this film, it feels
Hmm.
kind of similar to that scene in the Last Crusade, where they're in the Grail room, and there's that kind of guy
Yeah, the night.
that's, yeah, the older knight guy who's
Hmm.
giving them, he's like a riddle master kind of. So I it felt kind of like that, and it was well thought through, like the time travel thing. Like we got to when we were looking at Archimedes' tomb, you saw the propeller blades,
Hmm.
and they were
The
like, they pointed
watch.
them out, specifically the watch, and those are things that he sees when he comes to the wreck site. But it feels just like a stretch a bit too fantastical,
Hmm.
to kind of like Crystal Skull was, where it's like, here he is, he's talking literally with
Yeah.
Archimedes and interacting with him. It's like, that's a little weird to me.
Yeah. The Weekly Planet guy said this morning that we just shouldn't have seen anything from Archimedes' perspective. And I
Yes.
agree. We got too much insight into what was going on in those characters' lives when everything should have been experienced from the perspective of Indy and Helena, I think.
Hmm.
And
I agree.
I like I've said already, I respect the big swing of doing time travel. And I have landed, I was struggling with it on whether or not I liked it. And I've landed on, I do like the idea in concept, but the movie needed to do one of two things with it. The safer route would be, I think more in line with past Indiana Jones movies, is they just catch a glimpse of this past world and they prevent Mads Mikkelsen from actually using the dial. And it's kind of like a flyby through the storm. They see where they almost went, right? That's the
Hmm.
safe route. Or they should have spent a lot more time of the movie in the past. And a lot of the adventure should have been in this past era.
Hmm.
Because as is, it's kind of like in this weird middle ground where it's a massive change of what the story is very late in the game, and they don't do all that much with it. Like aside from Indy being sad at his current life and shot and maybe a little bit delirious, like maybe if we'd spent more time there, we could have seen him fall in love with this world and this era and be tempted to stay, even though he knows like in his heart he can't stay.
Hmm.
It just was like, it's a weird twist on the phrase, but it's like it was too much too late, instead of too little too late. It was just like a lot of different like world changing elements to the story introduced right at the end. Um, because I knew like the device is a time travel device. We knew the threat of time travel happening
Yes.
was a big part of it. But them actually going there, I think they needed to do it earlier if they were going to have them actually time travel.
Yeah. No, I get that. Definitely, I could see either of those working out well for the movie. And
Hmm.
I feel like the ending, it kind of drives a bit of a hypocritical like wedge into Indiana Jones as a character.
Hmm.
I know that he's kind of delirious and he's dying, but I feel like as a character, he has this kind of code, as an archaeologist of like, well, I'm not stealing, I'm preserving the
Mm-hmm.
culture. And I think any logical person would probably be like, well, I probably shouldn't mess with the timeline, but whatever. Maybe he doesn't think about that, but it's like
It
I
is
think
the
he would know.
60s too. I don't know
Yeah,
if
it is the
that's like
60s,
I
so
don't I
different
don't
era.
know when like concepts of the butterfly effect and stuff like that first came into being.
Yeah, that's fair.
Um it
Because
does
I feel
seem
like,
like Helena had some understanding of it though, because I love how she
yeah,
takes it the dial back and it's like he can't keep this. He has to build his own. Like we're taking this back with us. I thought that was funny.
yeah, I liked that. So I was like, maybe he shouldn't have done that, but whatever.
Hmm.
And but I thought that whole sequence was cool, like the action and just like seeing the things in the ancient time, like those inventions that
Triremes.
Indy, yeah, the things that Indy was talking about this at the start, the sun refraction devices and those other
Hmm.
things that Archimedes made. I thought that was really neat to see.
Yes.
And but I do agree with your note that you made earlier of like Helena punching him, taking that decision away from Indy. Uh, I like the happily ever after with Marion afterwards. That's
Hmm.
cool with me, except for that dialogue. But yeah, I don't like her punching him and having that
Yeah,
be his character resolution there.
exactly. It just like and his character arc does get resolved by Marion showing up, I guess. But like I talk about in our Raiders video, the how I felt Indy is a very active protagonist and does drive the major beats of the story. This is an incredibly important beat of this story, and his decision making power is completely taken away for it, and I do not love that. But I also like the nice happy ending. The only thing I don't like is he should not have grabbed the hat at the end. The hat should have
Mm-hmm.
just stayed and then closed in, because
Yeah,
they did this at the end of Crystal Skull too, where it's like, oh, Mutt's putting on the hat, and he's like, nope, and it's like, oh no, we still got more adventures, and that works fine in Crystal Skull. It's not appropriate here. This is meant
yeah,
to be the final film. Let the hat rest. Indy is done. You know.
yeah. I thought
Um,
that was kind of weird too.
it's a minor thing, but it was just kind of like, oh, okay.
Yeah, a little
um,
odd. Yeah, I had some small nitpicky notes too.
hmm.
I bet some other people have found or notice these too. So if
Yeah,
you notice these, please let me know if you have a good answer. But there's, Indiana Jones, he returns to his old apartment by the end of the film,
yeah,
but he had to run away from the United States earlier because he was framed for murder, or that was one of the reasons why he left.
yeah.
So is he still wanted by the end of the movie when he comes back to New York? It's not clear. I assume
Hmm.
he's fine, but he's still it's he's still wanted as far as I can tell.
Yeah, I'm sure he'll be fine. I'm sure
He's fine, yeah.
Sala probably got it sorted out while he was gone. Um,
Yeah, that's
one
probably true, yeah.
Yeah, and one not a nitpick thing, but just an interesting thing I was thinking about. It's like Indy is teaching at a new college in this movie, and
Hmm.
he's in a small apartment now. And I'd be interested to know, like, is that because of his divorce and he's a little bit like down
Oh
on his
yeah.
like he moved on because of the divorce and he wanted a change of scenery, or is it meant to be like his field is not of interest to people anymore, so he's kind of down on his luck financially because the world that he excelled in is not valued. um I think they wanted the visual shorthand of he's not in a good place right now, and I think that's
Yeah.
why it's like that, because he had a very nice house in the old movies and he taught at that very fancy looking college, and now he's teaching at a still fancy looking but less fancy looking college in the middle of the city, and he lives in a tiny apartment, and the young kids are like playing music and he doesn't like loud music, stuff like that.
Hmm.
um but yeah, it's not a big deal, but
Yeah.
I was kind of like, I'm curious what precipitated his move away from his like old places, you know.
Yeah, yeah, right. It's that would have been interesting to see.
Hmm.
I also was wondering this too, like just logistically, it's like Indy receives his retirement party, right? It how it's presented in the film, it's like right after that final lecture that he gives.
Uh-huh.
I feel like that party would come more at the end of the semester after the finals happen.
Yeah, maybe.
I don't know. I went to college, but I don't know what the faculty did. So
Yeah, maybe it's a preemptive retirement, like it's the party and then he's got like a couple weeks left. That's just
I
when they
could
could
see
get
that.
everybody together, you know?
Yeah, like everyone's still here before everyone leaves for summer vacation. Yeah, it was kind of weird.
Yeah.
And you had a note here too that I
I heard
noticed,
you
but I forgot to
mention
put
it
down.
in the theater. I heard
Yeah,
you whisper it, and you're like, and I was like, oh my god, he's right. So the Teddy and the big henchman, like they have a scuffle and they break the bridge that they use to get into this little place they're all in. But then at the end of the sequence, all the characters like use that same bridge to get out. Again,
yeah.
little things that don't bother me typically, and it didn't really bother me, but it is there, and it's like, huh, look at
It's like,
that.
how did no one notice that? What's going on here?
Yeah. But a couple of final thoughts, I think, on the movie, and I think we were pretty negative in our review, but I did enjoy it. I enjoyed watching it, and I think a lot of the people in our theater enjoyed watching it as well. It doesn't have those memorable, iconic moments that we've come to know from Indiana Jones movies. But Harrison Ford is great, and it is a fitting farewell to the character, even though we've now gotten 3 of those.
Yes.
I would say. You have any final thoughts?
I will just echo what you say. Yeah, I think it's
Mm-hmm.
a good conclusion. I don't think it's perfect. There's some swings and some misses for me. But I think it delivers for the most part on what it wants to
Mm-hmm.
be, which is an Indiana Jones action adventure film. I think it does well, and I think the performances are well. Um, but it's not as good as the ones that you remember.
Yeah, that's fair. All right, moving on to our last segment of the show, just other stuff we've been entertaining ourselves with. Niles, why don't you start us off? What have you been watching recently?
So we've been picking back up in Succession,
Very nice.
getting back through it. Ah, it's just so great. Like you have like you build such sympathy for some of these characters, and then at the same time you hate them with
Yes.
such a passion.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
I think I
Like
said at one point, it's like, I love how much I hate them and I hate how much I love them. Like,
yeah. Yeah, like I feel for them and I can completely understand their situation at the same time. You don't need to act like that. You could be nicer. You don't have to be an asshole. But yeah, I'm loving it. It's so great. We're almost done with the first season, so I think our
Mhm.
next episode is the wedding, the big
Mm.
wedding.
Oh boy.
And then I'm a fan of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, and they got the new season out,
Cool.
season 16, believe it or not. Super long running show.
Yeah.
Newer seasons, it's not as good as those first ones, but there's some really funny gags.
Hmm.
That's just like, wow, I'm surprised that they thought of that. Where it's
Yeah.
like, I don't want to spoil too much, but like, do you know, I know you've watched a few other episodes, Dylan. I've forced you to.
Yeah.
And
I like it. It's a good
there's
show.
yeah, it's a good show. But you know how like Charlie and Frank, they live in like a single room
Yes.
apartment.
Yeah.
Yeah, this season there's a reveal that Charlie has extra rooms. They're just boarded up. So it's like he has a full apartment with a bathroom and everything.
Oh
It's like,
my
what
God.
the hell?
So
So they
Danny
still got
DeVito just didn't know it was there and he's been keeping it
yeah.
from him the whole
Yeah,
time.
he
That's
just
why.
had no idea. So they still do a good job writing the show. It's just not quite on as good quality as it used to be, but I still love it. So I still
Yeah.
watch it. But that's kind of it for me. What about
Mhm.
you? What have you been up to, Dylan?
Carrying on through House of Leaves. I think I'm at like page 340 right now, so I'm like 2/3 of the
Nice.
way through the book, I think, unless I get to a stretch where there are like 50 pages with one word on them again, and then I'm close to the end, probably, which I
Yeah.
think happens again. But it's just so interesting to read. And
Phenomenal.
yep, also been playing a lot of Diablo 4. I finished the campaign. I don't remember if I'd finished it before our last episode or not, but really cool. And now I'm working through the end game, like grinding, leveling up, and all that stuff. And I've also this week been watching the new season of The Witcher.
Mm.
I've watched 3 episodes, and I want to love The Witcher show so much. I love the games. I love some of the novels, and the
Mhm.
show is just wildly inconsistent. But I think season 3, in terms of like narrative momentum, is actually working a lot more than season 2 did.
Hmm.
They're kind of following the book storyline now, which I'm sure helps. And there were a couple good action scenes in the first 3 episodes. I'm gonna watch the next 2 tonight, and then the next part of the
Cool.
season comes out next month. But I don't know. I think the show is just fucked. Like I wouldn't be
Yeah.
shocked if it gets canceled before season 4 because Henry Cavill's leaving. They have Liam Hemsworth replacing him as Geralt, but like I don't hear anybody talking about the show, or I just get a
Yeah.
vibe that people are not watching it, and that being on Netflix means it's gonna be canceled like next month.
Unfortunately,
So,
yeah.
but
Yeah.
I'm rooting for it. I love The Witcher.
Yeah.
It's a great world. It has great characters. The show is just not found its feet, and
Unfortunately,
it's a
yeah.
little late in the game to not have found your feet, unfortunately. But
Oh, it's a shame.
yeah, but I'm gonna watch more of it, so I will just eat and consume.
Love, consume, love it.
Consume, yes. But that is gonna do it for our show this week.
Yes.
We will see you guys back in 2 weeks for Mission Impossible, I think. It's coming
Oh
out.
man, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Something like that. Mission Impossible, I think, yeah, or Oppenheimer or Barbie or something. I can't
Oppenheimer's
remember.
into them. Yeah. Yeah, and we're gonna talk. We'll explain next episode what we're gonna do for Oppenheimer and Barbie, because we want to review both. So
Yes.
we're gonna work it out so we can review both. But I think Mission Impossible comes out mid-month, so that's probably next. But we'll see you guys for that. I might have to do a rewatch of those. But until that point, Niles, where can people find you on the internet?
On Instagram at Niles Got No Styles. What about you, Dylan? Where can people follow you?
On Twitter for now, at D-Day Movies. On Instagram at DylanD1026. On YouTube at D-Day Movies. On Twitch at D-Day_movies. And when the Twitter ship finally sinks, you can now find me on Blue Sky at D-Day
Hey,
Movies. I finally got in. Yay.
there you go.
It's basically the exact same as Twitter, but it's not owned by Elon Musk, and he can't fuck it up in new and creative ways every week.
Yay. Good
Okay,
idea.
do you have an idea of what's happened on Twitter
Oh,
in the last?
I heard about the tweet limit that users
Yes.
could read on
So,
certain subscription plans or whatever.
okay, so I'm going to explain something to our audience. Niles and I both work in marketing professionally,
Yes.
and so we understand a little bit about this world. And Twitter as a platform has 2 primary target audiences from a business perspective. One, the users. What do the users value? Being able to view tweets, engage on the platform, post, and paid users of Twitter get they can look at 10,000 posts a day or something.
Yeah.
Free users can look at like 800. That is a couple of scrolls down the thing. It's nothing. So you've killed the user experience for one, but 2, more importantly, for a business perspective, advertisers. That's the moneymaker. And a platform like Twitter advertises on what is called a CPM. That's how it's priced. And CPM is cost per 1,000 impressions. If your users cannot view the content on your platform, the advertiser is not serving impressions. So you cannot charge your advertiser for impressions. Elon. He's so dumb.
It's such a weird idea. Like it's a surface level when you think about it for 2 seconds, you're like, that's a great idea to encourage more people to sign up. And then you think about it for 2 more seconds, and then you say, oh, that's a terrible idea for everyone involved.
Yep. And especially because like paying doesn't give you unlimited viewing access. It's only, and apparently people are like looking into it more. And the reason is Elon is trying to migrate Twitter off of Google's servers, apparently, because he doesn't want to pay the bill to Google, and he owes them $1 billion for the bill.
Wow.
So in order to cut on server cost or something, he's been just like limiting usage on the app. So he's basically done a DDoS attack on his own website that he paid $44 billion for.
All right. That's
Hey, you listening at home, never never quit on your dreams because you're probably smarter than the richest guy on earth. You can do it. Thank you all so much for watching and listening and indulging me in my bullshit. We'll see you guys in 2 weeks. Bye.
Thanks for listening. Bye.